بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وآله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. Going to look at what self-evident means at a very basic level to start with, but we'll continue this because we want to look at the meaning of self-evident in different contexts in the future as well, in a more complex and complicated situations. So what is self-evident? Self-evident in logic, philosophy, mathematics, epistemology, that which is intuitively true. Well, depends on what you mean by intuitively, because if you take intuitive to be the opposite of inferential, then probably it's not true, because we can know certain very basic inferential truths which seem self-evident as well. So, but I guess it depends on what self-evident, intuitive mean in this context. So that which intuitively true, generally referring to the principles of logic and axioms of mathematics, whose truth cannot be doubted. That's another criterion he is giving. But if you are Cartesian, you can doubt almost anything, and which do not require proof. So he is talking about three things. So let's stop here. So he basically gives three conditions for any proposition to be, or principles to be self-evident. First, that they are intuitively true. So their truth can be just directly perceived. So, but I said if he is using intuitively to as a opposite of inferential, then that might not be necessarily true, and that cannot be doubted. So it cannot be doubted. But if you are a Cartesian, for example, at least at the methodological level or methodological level, you can doubt almost anything. And we can't. And the third, he is saying, which doesn't require a proof. It doesn't require proof. But that's also not very. The 1 + 1 2 doesn't require proof for a non-mathematician, or just in a general life context. But in the context of mathematics, it might require proof. So that's not a very good start, but let's see. Before we go on, let's see what self-evident mean in English dictionary, for example. This one, in this dictionary in front of me, self-evident mean a fact or situation. That is self-evident is a fact or situation is self-evident. So that's the definition. When it is so obvious obvious is. So that's I don't think that definition mentioned that so far, unless he's meaning by intuitive he meaning obvious, which you can mean depending on the context. So self-evidence is that we will never have enough resources to meet the demand. It is self-evident is obvious that there is. It is so obvious that there is no need to meet. No need for proof and explanation. But since it is a general context, we can so what stands out is obvious. So some truths are so obvious that they don't need any further evidence. So don't talk about proof. I think proof is more some. So that can be a good starting. Some truths or claims are so obvious that they don't need further evidence. So their evidence is sort of philosophers use this strange. The truth is sort of self. Yeah, there's evidence in their own self in a sense. That's why self. They are evidence of their own truth. Philosophers sometimes say that. Yeah, they say like I don't like this way of saying it. It's just very pretentious, but they say a self-evident sentence or claim theirs is truthhood or falsehood on its sleeve. They normally say semantic status. That's what it means. So they wear their truth, their proof, or their evidence on their sleeve. Okay. And where its semantic status is another way of saying a proposition being a claim or a sentence or whatever you want, is self-evident if its truth can be derived from its meaning of the term. Again, is using derived. So that's a different way of defining self-evident. One way of defining self-evident is that they are obvious. Their meaning is their evidence is their own self. That is, they wear their evidence on their sleeve, or their evidence is clear uh, as soon as we understand their meaning. Okay, so that's what he's saying. A proposition is self-evident of its truth if its truth can be derived from the meaning of the term it includes. So this can be taken to, although then again it's so not probably because he is talking in a technical context that might have some bearing, but for our purpose right now, what we can say is a claim or sentence or proposition is self-evident if we can, or if we we know its truth, and by truth they mean truth or falsehood, as soon as we understand that claim or that sentence or that proposition. Okay, so that's what he's saying. A proposition is self-evident if its truth can be derived from the meaning of the terms it includes, so that anyone who knows the meaning of the words knows that the proposition is true. Such a proposition must be analytic. That's not true. Because, for example, again, obviously, depends on what you mean by analytic as against synthetic. But one way of although this has been challenged, one way of understanding an analytic is sentence which is in a sense tautology or tautological. But for example, 1 plus 1, 2, Aristotle's example of a self-evident claim. And obviously most people would say it's true, this claim. Once you understand 1 plus 1, then you can't deny that it's true. But this is not necessarily an analytic sentence, at least not according to Kant, for example. But probably that doesn't matter for defining self-evidence. I don't know. And one of the thing is, if you claim that a sentence is or a claim is self-evidently true, then its negation would be self-evidently false, or its negation will involve you in a sort of a self-contradiction. Okay, so if you want to say 1 plus 1 is not 2, then obviously it's false, and it's self-evidently false for most people. And probably you are involving yourself in some sort of contradiction, saying 1 plus 1 is not 2, because then if you believe that to be true, then you would have to accept things which are patently false. But you might think that they're true, then it will involve yourself in some sort of self-contradiction, or at least inconsistency. Being evident is generally used as synonym for a priori. I'm not sure about that. But he's saying generally, so because a priori means a priori, obviously it means, sorry, it depends on what you mean by a priori. For in Kantian terms, it's a condition of experience, but it's not experience itself. 1 plus 1 is equal to 2 is not a priori in that sense. But let us not delve in that. Okay, now it is a bit of critique, but the discovery of logical paradoxes, especially self-referential sentences like this sentence is true or this sentence is false, etc. And that lead to sort of logical paradoxes, shows that the faith in self-evidence of logical and mathematical axioms is not secure. And if it is So self-evidence is not the same as being obvious. It's not the same, but it is some sort of obviousness, as its dictionary meaning says. And I think in philosophical tradition also you can find this meaning, and even in this entry, I think. So if self, although it says derived, so probably wanted to preempt that, but I think traditional definitions of, probably Aristotelian definition of self-evident, and even psychological explanations of, modern psychological explanation of self-evident, for example, think in the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, System 1 and System 2, I think. System 1 is an example of self-evident truths. So I'm not sure about that, because for a thing might be obvious but not true. That's true, but that doesn't mean that. So obviousness itself is obviously not self-evident, but if it is obvious that some sentences true or false, its truth or false is obvious, that makes it self-evidence. It doesn't require further. So in that sense, it's obvious, but not obvious in the sense that every obvious sentence is true. On the other hand, a truth can be self-evident without being immediately obvious. Well, that's the question of definition, but a lot of, and I will finish on that, a lot of, in traditional logic, in Aristotelian logic, for example, and in Muslim or Islamic logic, including usul fiqh, when they make the distinction between badihi and nazari, or badihi stands for what we will call self-evident truths, and nazari for non-self-evident truths, and badihi is sometimes also called zaruri, which might be translated as necessary. Where did we start from? Yeah, I was talking about his claim that on his or her, I don't know who has written this entry. On the other hand, a truth can be self-evident without being immediately obvious. I think a lot of traditional logic and epistemology, by traditional I mean Aristotelian and medieval and Islamic, defines self-evidence as immediate, and that gels with, and that is sort of reinforced by, for example, System 1 and System 2 distinction. And immediacy is one great difference between self-evident and non-self-evident. So in that sense, we might say that self-evident, not every self-evident defined in this entry would be self-evident in the sense of badihi or zaruri. And also self-evident as defined in this entry might not have one-to-one correspondence with, in that case, with System 1 of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. On the other hand, self-evident truth can, on the other hand, a thing might be obvious but not true. On the other hand, truth can be self-evident without being immediately obvious. But then It won't be the type of self-evidence which we traditionally know of 1 plus 1, 2. Because time is, immediacy is the one factor, the way they define it. And the same is true for system 1. Reasoning might still be required in order to grasp it. Yeah, but we are not denying that reasoning is required, but if that reasoning takes a lot of time, then it is not self-evident in the traditional sense. Anyway, let's read this last pithy pithy quote from Joseph, an introduction to logic. In calling anything self-evident, we mean not that it is evident without need for understanding. Obviously not. How can something be evident without understanding? That seems just very illogical introduction to logic book. But that we need consider nothing but the terms of the judgment to see its necessity. Okay, I mean, if that's how you define it, then I mean, definitely we can't obviously deny you the right to define terms as you wish, but that doesn't correspond with that doesn't correspond with what we traditionally understand by self-evident as badihi or nazar, badihi or daruri, or even system 1 propositions in decision logic or as portrayed by Kahneman. Okay, we'll stop here. It was, I think, worthwhile to go through. It just gave us some initial grip on very basic things about self-evidence and some of the issues involved in that. Inshallah, we'll build on that in coming days and months and years, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wa sallim ala sayyidina wa maulana wa habibina wa shafina Muhammadin wa alihi wa ashabihi wa azwajihi wa itratihi wa awanihi wa ikhwanihi ila yawmiddin. Wa lanatullahi ala a'daihim ajma'in bi rahmatika.